Hi, everybody. This is a conversation with the wonderful Sam Lee, who is a renowned folk musician. He's also a song collector, a conservationist, and really celebrated for revitalizing ancient British and Irish folk traditions and folk songs, which otherwise would have been lost without him. I'm really excited to be speaking to him. He's also one of the faculty members on New Ways of Knowing, our course, which is beginning on the 14th of January. And I wanted to introduce Sam a little bit differently before we go into the conversation with a story. So Sam was a guest teacher at a retreat that I was co-facilitating with Small Giants Academy as part of the Mastery of Systems leadership course that we've been running for now about sort of 7 months, and it begins with a retreat and ends with a retreat. And so Sam was a guest teacher at that first opening retreat, and he had given this amazing sort of, music journey and talk, kind of talking about the link between the land and song and the way culture is transmitted through this interaction between both of them. And afterwards, in the Q&A, one of our participants raised his hand and shared really vulnerably and very openly about having been quite activated by the concept of this is our land or connecting to our land, because he came from a country that had been colonized for many years. And it was a very strong sharing. It definitely brought up for me a sense of, the complexity of, belonging, land, connection that I think many of us feel. And so it was quite an intense moment in the room. And we were all looking to Sam to see what he would say in response. And he didn't actually say anything. He really just sat and let the silence spread and just be in the room. And that really helped everything just to kind of settle, gave us, time and space just to be with the sharing. And then he did respond, but he didn't respond using words. He responded with a song. So it was a really beautiful song full of loss and connection, and similar to this one that he's recorded.
When the land whispers, don't be a stranger, that irresistible call to come home, to the wandering swear an allegiance, renew an old contract to roam. I felt in my heart a great yearning, leave a life so beholden to time. So I packed up my promise to face the uncertain.
Here we are, Sam. Good to have you on.
Hey, Ali. Lovely to be here.
So, Sam, firstly, I'm very excited because we've never had a conversation like this. We've had conversations in the past, hanging out, but we haven't done this before, and I've wanted to do this for a while. You're also going to be one of the teachers on our course, New Ways of Knowing, starting very soon. So I wanted to give people a sense of who you are and your amazing body of work and your very unique story. And some of that really ties into some issues I've been exploring on Kainos for a while, particularly the question of who belongs where, right? This is the question of immigration, the question of land. And as someone who's delved deeply into the history and stories and songs of a land, I thought it would be an interesting place to start, to just ask you, what comes up for you when you hear words like that? Place, land, belonging, how do you understand it?
Well, the first thing to say is that it's a different response in every different place at different times in one's life, in response to the people I'm with, the season. There are so many variables. And I think we must always be forgiving to ourselves when we approach and feel this vastness of connection that's expected to be had. And how does one find that place, that sense of belonging? And actually that word for me is always such a bit of poetry, because within it much said this idea of how does one be longing? How am I longing for the land? And how can I be in that place? What does that mean? What does longing for land involve? And And it's full of complexities about how we have access and permission, the legal framework that we exist in. I'm speaking specifically for England here, and also then Great Britain, and then globally. And as a global world of people who have multiple homes, and multiple places of nascence, that idea of the indigenousness, this of where one is born to. And there are many different ways that we can relate, and nascency and longing can be for a very rich urban area as much as it can be for a beautiful bucolic bit of wild nature, or less than wild nature as well. And so there's such an overwhelm that I find of trying to reconcile when I'm in a place of what's the health of the land, the ecological stability and profundity in that place. Is this a place of biodiversity? Is this a beleaguered bit of field edge that's been battered by industrial agriculture with very little struggling to survive? How healthy is the soil, the bird song? Likewise, what's below? Who's been walked these lands? What's the archaeological, human, anthropological lineage and place? There's so much. The one is like, kind of, oh, this is really ancient land. People have been here for thousands of years doing their human thing. Yeah, it's also an exhausted field. Or sometimes you go to a place that has had no humans really on any profound level, and is rich in life and has a whole other activation. These are all the things that one is juggling with, trying to find a sense of attunement. And when one does do that little bit of listening, puts their ear to the ground, so to speak, all the filtering that signal to noise ratio out. Yeah.
Yeah. What a wonderful way to start. Yeah, I think the complexity of the question is what's often lost in the kind of mainstream conversation around it, because I've just moved we're back rather to Belfast, and and I'm sort of in the city centre as well. And it's just and I have my mum grew up here. I have a lot of family here, and Belfast has a very rich and traumatic and complex history, and it's fascinating just to kind of be in it again. And then it makes me think of London, where I've just moved from. Another city with just a kind of such a deep, rich history. And then I think when we talk about coming back to the land, somehow there's often this sense of, oh, it's out in nature somewhere. It's not the city. So I was glad you named that. And yet it's, it is also all nature. And so you have this amazing story. You are a Londoner, British Londoner, North Londoner, I believe. So, but you went on this quest journey, kind of yearning to kind of find the ancestral songs of these islands. And so how did that come about, from you being someone who grew up in a city, effectively, or near a city?
Yeah. Well, in some ways, I was lucky, because I hadn't really grown up as many of the folk musicians and communities that have kept the British folk tradition alive. I didn't grow up in a family that knew anything about folk music, and it wasn't part of my life, though it was a little bit in an organisation a charity that I was sent off camping with as a kid. There was a bit of a campfire singing tradition. But when I discovered this repertoire, this incredible, enormous oral culture that Britain and our islands have been the keepers of, it just hit me like a ton of bricks that we have one of the broadest and most diverse and complex narrative traditions and melodic traditions of anywhere in the world. Yet we're also country that knows least about it and pays least attention. And Ali, you might be slightly different, because growing up in Ireland with an Irish connection, it's a little bit more part of the expressive part of your DNA.
Yes, but I grew up mainly in Germany, and then spent a lot of time here. And in Germany, I don't think I remember anyone really singing ever, except during football matches. But yeah.
Well, and of course, they have their relationship with national song, with indigenous song there, because it was co-opted for the nationalist movement and the Nazi movement. So it was then treated with great shame that was a music of the fascism, which of course it isn't, but it was deemed, and this is one of those things of what is this music, and how vulnerable is it to disappearing, but also being misconstrued or reappropriated for nefarious means. But I came at it kind of sort of slightly blank canvas that like, who are these voices? Who are these songs? These are wonderful, beautiful, deep, complex songs and simple at the same time. And fell in love as a 20-year-old. And long story short, was listening to a huge amount of archival recordings made from wax cylinders in the 1950s on reel-to-reels, did a lot of research, and was like, who's singing these songs today in the oral tradition, not just in the folk clubs or in the revival, in the kind of the reenacted sense. Was told by all the academics, there are no singers alive, everyone's dead. The oral tradition's come to an end. It's now coming out of a reclaimed recorded revival tradition. And I was like, this is not possible. Can't be right. And the hot-headed, irascible 24-year-old in me was actually apprenticed to a song collector by luck, a man who worked with David Attenborough, who was also a song collector before he became a naturalist. Yeah, Peter Kennedy and David Attenborough worked for the BBC making radio docs. And in his last 6 months of his life, took me in and told me his stories of song collecting. And I was like, this is what I want to do. So I went out to the gypsy traveller community and to the halting sites and the traveller sites, side of roads, under motorways and the backwaters of society, and knocked on caravan doors. And there began 15 years of recording and documenting and just listening to some incredible elders who had been utterly ignored and dismissed by society, but were actually carriers of enormous wisdom and beautiful music and little insights into my relationship to being British and to the land. So that's where I went on my song collecting journeys. And other experiences happened as well along the way to induct me into what singing means for me and the transmission.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible story as well, because there is, it just struck me as you were talking that, so much of the lineage of music, let's just say on YouTube, there will be the 50s, say, the 60s, the 70s, there'll be Beatles things, there'll be, every which thing, but they're stored in servers, and those servers don't change the actual music. The music is fixed. Whereas when music lives within a person or is carried in a person, it's alive, I think, in a different way. And it is also changing as they change, in a sense. So I haven't thought of this before, but if you'd knocked on one of those doors 30 years earlier, and, the person who maybe was 80 years old when you first saw them was 50, I'm sure they would, the song is the song, but there's some slight, differences, I would imagine, that their life and the world kind of feeds into it.
You make a really interesting point. And it all comes under this kind of the other term which we hear around the AI, which is the ancestral intelligence. And what does that mean for a song that could be up to 1,000 years old to have only existed within and I'm cautious to say the body, because actually one of the singers who was greatest influence on me, my teacher, is a Scottish traveller, but from his culture believed very much that the songs were stored outside and one tuned into them. And there's a whole sort of philosophy that his family had about what that activation of song meant, and that we are just the vessel, and the song is collectively owned, collectively looked after. But what does that mean for it to be for us to be the expressors? What does it mean for me not to be sitting around a campfire now? The songs have existed in the circle, in the community, around the fire forever. That's where that was the platform, that was the crucible in which these songs evolved. What does it mean to then take them out, hold them, sing them in concert halls and into microphones, onto recording and with instruments, and to imagine their possession, to how these songs can be possessed, animate and be animated. So I think there's this really interesting sort of like, what happens to these songs and how do they survive in a completely radical rethinking of what their role is, and how does one act respectfully in both of the song and the ancestors that have kept those songs going. And these are all the things, like listening to the land, you're like, there's so many people telling me how to do it right and how to do it wrong, or am I and then at the same time just letting song flow and be truthful. This is the conundrum of being a singer with
Yeah,
this.
especially, I mean, the responsibility and then also the fact that if you didn't sing in concerts and, on the radio and publicly, then people wouldn't hear those songs, or very few people would hear those songs. And so that it's such a complex question. And it makes me think about, a few topics I've been wrestling with recently about, the fact that the internet has changed probably for the worse in the last decade or so, and now with the advent of I think social media in particular is becoming like a zero trust zone, in the sense that you don't know what's real at all. And it's actually something I talk about in my book, The Bigger Picture, that psychedelic experiences, and DMT in particular, give us this type of template for navigating a space where you don't know what to trust, and you don't know what's real, and you don't know who's a friend or who's a foe. And the internet is increasingly becoming like that. And I think one of the responses that's already happening, and I think will continue, is that people will leave that form of the internet. I think people will be on WhatsApp and using their email and stuff. Those are very useful tools, but there's a craving and a yearning for something that is effectively secret. And these, a lot of certainly perhaps they weren't secret, but they were held within certain communities or certain groups. And I think that's another interesting dynamic at play. These kind of there's these yearnings for everything kind of everything everywhere all the time with the internet and like our communication technology. And then I think a growing yearning of, I want to hear a song that only a few of us have heard, yeah.
It all comes down to this word that's always been such a complex and debatable and slightly annoying word, which is authenticity. And it's like, within the folk world, it's like, is it authentic? Are they an authentic singer? Is that an authentic folk song? Are they singing authentic? Are they, and it's all these questions of, yes, no, throw them to the lions, or no, put them on a pedestal. This is the most authentic thing. And the sort of the kind of charade of charlatans that one gets, and conundrums of, and actually in some ways the AI thing may playing into folk music's hand quite wonderfully, because in a place where nothing can be trusted, an old man standing up or old woman standing up and singing a 300-year-old song that sends shivers, there is nothing that can refute the honesty and the potency of that experience. We're very, I think the thing is the platforms on which a lot of this stuff happens, the AI stuff happens, it's, they are untrustworthy but when you step out of them, if you can, when you step and into the place of, as the singers taught me, face to face, heart to heart, eye to eye, ear to ear, this place of true connection. And the old stuff suddenly holds such more value and worth, because everything else can't be trusted. And maybe this is going to play into a positive sense, because folk music's always struggled with a sense of relevance, of what does it mean? Why is it important? Why is folk music such a marginalized and ignored, unsupported art form? And maybe now the live arts, and particularly the old arts, will they'll realize that actually we need the old technology back.
Yeah, I think that could well happen. I could imagine. I mean, there was a folk revival in the 60s, right? So I think it never goes away. It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, it's sort of marginalized, but then it's still around, folk music from lots of different traditions. I find that interesting about the quest for authenticity. It's funny because I play traditional Irish music. You don't get it as much. Also because of, well, I think there might be a difference between song and music, but there's this I wonder if there's an anxiety more in Britain around the relationship with the authenticity, because like Morris dancing, which was sort of invented, wasn't it, in like the Victorian era, kind of. I don't know. I've heard that. It was like,
no,
yeah.
It was definitely revived, and then it had a sort of boost of popularization, and then it nearly just was destroyed by the First World War, because most of the dancers were killed, and then has grown back up again. But actually it does have very ancient origins, and there are 1600s illuminations of dancers in kind of Morris-like outfits. So no, it has, where it comes from, it's definitely not British. It's probably of, ascent or, mixture. Yeah, all sorts of theories. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a case in point about, the nature of cultural exchange through all of this. Nothing is just of one place, really. Everything is interconnected and interpenetrating.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so responsive. It's always responsive to the environment. You know this better than anyone, that the Irish tradition has thrived because of the oppression that came from the English. To deny it, to forcibly try and destroy it and remove it, could only strengthen it. The irony is that English music has suffered so badly because of the legacy of shame and trauma over what the English have done to ourselves, to our own culture, because we did what we did to the Irish, to the English folk singers and dancers and instrumentalists. But it comes with this very uncertain sense of pride. And this is all what, going back to your first question, how do we renew a sense of pride and that responsibility to love and celebrate when it feels so abused? The music feels abused, the land feels abused. There's so much contiguousness between the way we've treated our music and our indigenous cultures and the way we've treated our ecosystems. And you look at the decline of biodiversity, of birdsong particularly, and you realize it in terms of globally, you look at the decline of languages, indigenous languages, and they go hand in hand at exactly the same rate of decline, about how human culture and ecological culture disappear. It's very interesting. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of something I wanted to pick up on earlier, with this idea that the songs come from outside of us, and we channel them. You get that as well in Shipibo culture, and I think some other Amerindian cultures who have ayahuasca ceremonies, the Icaros, songs that people receive, and they have different functions. And, I've spoken to a few people, experts in this, and a few of them have pointed out that the lyrics of the songs are fairly mundane, and really it's about the melody, and the melody does something. It's a kind of, the melody has almost a pattern and a form which, in a ceremonial setting, might make someone vomit or might help someone to come back to themselves, or so I love that idea that there's information that, and I do, I have had experiences that would lead me to seeing this as, certainly at least some of the way things are. But it links back to this question of the ecology, because the other mindset is we're in control. We decide what happens, and we're going to enforce a particular kind of onto the environment, and defend against the idea for as long as possible that we're actually in it, which you can't do forever, as we're seeing now. Eventually, the ducks come home to roost. Don't know what ducks don't really do that, but I'm going to stick with that. I like it. It's a new phrase.
When you're on ayahuasca, they do. Explain more what you mean by that, then.
So what I mean is that I think there's a link between the conceit that everything song, but also ideas and ways of being, come exclusively from the human mind. And this is kind of like an enlightenment related thought. It's like it's the triumph of the human will and reason over nature that creates civilization and keeps things going. I think there's some truth to that. I think there's a dynamic dance, but I think what it completely misses out, and back to your point about the effect it has not just on the environment, but on also other cultures that aren't playing the game your culture is playing, if you're the dominant one, is that it completely eradicates anything that doesn't fit that mold. And so there's like it's a mindset as much as it is a, political reality.
Yeah, God, there's so much in there. And it's just reminding me of a book that I'm in at the moment called An Immense World, which I'm sure you've come across, Ed Young. And it speaks a lot about the umwelt and this idea of the kind of the lived experience and sensory perception in the animal and human kingdom. And it's really picking up for me on this kind of idea of like the hardware that we are given, and actually what an incredible and highly attuned and sensitive body the human species has evolved and inherited. And within that is also the capacity for, through working with plant and fungi and medicine to, I guess, is not just to channel, but to create the channels. And in that, to direct and enhance and by nature to exclude possibility. And when you talk about the Icaros, which is so different from the British tradition, because the British tradition is such like, we have a song, we have these lyrics, and there's small variations, but actually the Icaros is sort of downloading this sort of within you can't just stand up and sing these songs. You have to have trained, you have to have initiated through practice to be able to tune into that particular frequency, to then know that those are the lyrics, and this is the pain that needs to be healed, and this is the purge that needs to be provoked. And that's incredible that humans can get to that level of porosity and specificity. And it's working in levels that we just don't understand as well. For me, this is, just to go back to the British folk song, I lament where that sacredness and the spirituality and that sensitivity was long squished out, crushed and forbidden, but I also love seeing where little kind of appendixes and lingerings on from a pre-Christian and ritualistic, animistic time have just held on almost kind of homeopathically, and can almost like a tiny little ember be teased up into a fucking roasting hot bit of, Icaran, like Icaran
Lovely.
type material. It's there. It disappears. It goes underground. But we can, if we know what we're doing, we can call it back in.
Yeah, that's beautifully expressed. And I've seen you do that, or heard and felt you do that, which is a great privilege. And, particularly in singing with Nightingales, which we'll talk about a little bit later, because, that's just an extraordinary experience that you run every spring into early summer, basically. But the, just on that point of, because I'm very interested in song as a way of transmitting information and a skill, the receptivity to song and the communication of ideas and feelings through song as a way of knowing, and a skill that I think we need to reintegrate into society now, probably more than ever. And there's something as well that really struck me as you were talking about human beings and our capacity, our bodies, our cognition, this incredible capacity we have to, say, find Icaros. But as far as I'm aware, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're the only animal that can sing. Obviously, there's birds that can mimic song, and that's, of course, not, I wouldn't say bird song isn't song, right? But what I mean is rhythm, right? And rhythm in the way we understand it. So, like, I believe chimpanzees can't move in rhythm to a beat. Right. And so they might accidentally do it for a while, but the sense of being in rhythm and in tune, as far as I know, is a human thing, a uniquely human thing. Now, you might know more than me on that, but that's the information that I'm sitting with.
I'm not going to disagree with you, but there's also from this Umwelt thing, this idea of the kind of human perspective that we see with an assumption that we project the humanity onto other species, but actually there are worlds that they are hearing and seeing, frequencies that are totally different to us, and things we may do rhythm, but actually there are things that the animal kingdom are hearing, and there's enormous amounts of rhythm in the animal world. I mean, don't get me wrong, particularly within the insect world, but within birds as well, the drumming of the woodpeckers, the wren, the amazing trill and dynamism in the wren. Rhythm for them might be a very boring thing if they were to try and understand what the human idea of rhythm, because they're hearing musical concepts and ideas that are way beyond what we could ever cognitively appreciate. So I'm always cautious of saying we can do this and they can't, because it's like, but they don't need rhythm. It's rhythm because we fucking need it, because it's our way of sorting our problems out.
Well, that is a really interesting point as well, because the other thing that was coming up for me is hearing a primatologist talk about, there was a picture of two chimpanzees holding a log between them, and someone was like, oh, look at them working together, and the primatologist was like, no, they don't work together in the way that we understand working together in that way. They might have, even the way they hunt is quite scattered, and, they're social animals, but the way we project working together. And there's something about rhythm and song and singing together and moving together, which is incredibly binding. and brings communitas, and that's another key aspect of this, and a reason for, not a reason for, but or justification, but something that makes you bringing these songs to the wider world in a concert, or on Spotify or on the radio important, right? Because because song binds people together, and we are very unbound right now and very fragmented.
Yeah. Well, they say the family that sing together stay together. There's a doing bigger picture thing. Like, yeah, it's great getting up on a stage and singing with a band with a load of people sitting silently in front and appreciating. Like, yeah, it's good. It's good for my ego, the narcissist in me. The bit that I love the most, and for me, my greatest experiences have been sitting in circle with friends around the fire and singing collectively, and being in a place, in a community that has a repertoire of songs where we can, in unison and in harmony, just flow for hours and hours and so on. That for me is my happy place, because I know that my whole body knows that I'm doing something that every one of my ancestors has understood in a very different language and a place, and God knows what it was like. And I'm saying ancestors, like not 100 years ago or 200 years ago, but, over the tens of thousands of years. So for me, that is something very special. But in the bigger picture, looking forward as well, I mean, I just feel like there's something in the mechanics, in this technology of shared song, not just folk song, but collective singing, that's going to be immensely important in times ahead, when the concert halls don't operate, when the way we used to meet suddenly isn't functionable anymore, and the things we've grown dependent on can't support our riverside Zoom calls and that sort of thing, that we go back and that we're holding on to a little bit of a rule book of like how it was done and why, and it was done that way because it felt fucking good.
Yeah.
And it's what we need. So I feel like, whatever's going on, I feel like the longer picture, this is such important stuff. And it's not just the songs, but it's just the confidence to stand up and share and call people into music.
I think that's beautiful. Yeah, I could feel the yearning for that and the need for that in like the social body. And also I can see how very easily it could be done, to have almost like guerrilla song sharing and gatherings. I just had an image of, so many city centers are dedicated to shopping. And as shopping has moved online, there now, there's all these questions that local councils have of like, what do we do with it? It's just basically vape shops and bedding shops, and like kind of the purpose of the center of towns and cities is really under question. And I often have just kind of muse on that and think, what could we do with those spaces that would be valuable? And one of the things would definitely be, right, it's song. Someone's going to hold a singing session in this, what used to be a Boots. And now I just love that idea of sort of like peppering back. It's what Terence McKenna called the archaic revival, taking the best aspects of what we need, because it feels good and we actually need it as human beings. I think singing together and sharing stories together in person, not as a social media post of like, which is broadcast effectively. It's broadcast and then there's kind of a feedback loop. But when you share a story in person, it's a completely different experience.
Yeah. Did you grow up with story? And can you remember times where that was part of?
Yeah, certainly both my parents are really avid readers, and so really got me to reading. But I remember my mum reading stories to me, bedtime stories, and doing different voices of the different characters. And it's a beautiful memory. And actually story time was my favorite thing in school as well. It's the thing I was most into, and became a writer, so it was obviously it was meant to be. But there's something I never get sick of stories. I never get sick of telling them. I never get sick of watching them, because they're about people, and people are the most complex, wonderful, contradictory, paradoxical, maddening, beautiful. Like it's all there, even in the essence. I'm big into story, into like, there's a book called The Seven Basic Plots by Christopher Booker, which is like a Bible to me. I have a dog-eared copy. Then also Joseph Campbell's work on myth. And so I am kind of quite Jungian in how I see story. I think there are a few core stories, and I think it's more that a story is about our own becoming. It's about someone going from being less to being more mature, more connected, more themselves, or in a tragedy, not. But then but then there's a kind of the social body then kind of heals that in some way. So they're about egotism and self. They're about egotism and connectedness and how those things interact, which is our day to day reality as human beings.
Yeah. Yeah. I know for me, one of the great worries about social media and kids is that the patience and the formative moments of hearing long form story is becoming such a poverty of it, and how much that we need to develop that taste for a good story, and that also now that judiciousness for knowing what's a good story and what isn't a good story, because they guide us.
Yeah, that is the attention span aspect of it. I notice even in myself is, it's been impacted by the online world. And so I really, I feel for, parents such as yourself and the kids themselves who are kind of exposed to that. But I think there's also an adaptation that then happens as well, and I think, well, that's my hope. And the other thing I worry about is that people don't read a lot of fiction, and that is what I started writing. That's what I've started writing fiction again. In fact, actually about an AI that creates a story that's so compelling that pretty much everyone in the world starts watching it, except for the main characters who meet in a kind of, small group together to figure out what the hell's going on. But you don't know what it's about, because if you know what it's about, you're hooked, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it also was that anxiety around, an AI hacking into the dynamics of story and personalizing it. But, there's this anxiety I have around, I'm going to put that out on the Substack, and, next year. I've been writing it for a while in these kind of short, kind of novella length chapters, about 10 of them. And my concern is well, people don't really read fiction, but I'm going to do it anyway. And there'll be, there will be a segment of my audience who hopefully will read fiction and enjoy it. But there's almost there's almost a defiance in it for me, because I'm people don't read fiction, but I really think they should. And every time I get a friend to read a fiction book who hasn't read fiction in a while, and they like it, I feel like I'm like, yes, great, recruited someone. Because people see it as a waste of time. And that's it. Alan Watts said this about music, is the whole point of art is that there's no point to it. And he has this lovely phrase of if there was a point to music, whoever wrote the fastest song would win, and people would just come to a concert to hear the final chord. It's it was to get somewhere. And so I think there's something about writing and storytelling, whether that's, written or whether it's sitting around a fire, of not everything has to have an end goal and a linear point to it. It's about the thing itself.
Yeah, I mean, I so agree with you. And firstly, I'm guilty as charged for not being a fiction reader enough.
I'll send you a list after this.
Yeah, please do. I just in this day and age, I kind of want to learn as much as I possibly can from the fictional books to help me, make the stories up better myself, I guess. But maybe.
But on that, the thing is, on that, we remember stories, if you want to remember facts, a historical fiction novel will give you a sense of, it's good to do both, of course. I'm not saying it's a substitute for, but a historical fiction or a book set at its particular time gives you the retention is very different, and this sense of what it was like and what the world was like. And, so that's where I think it does have a value, but I almost don't want to justify fiction on that metric, but it's a way in. So, Sam, tell us a bit about Singing with Nightingales, because there's another aspect to this, which is the connection of song and nature. And I think possibly more than anyone that I've come across, you've explored that in a really beautiful way. So tell people what Singing with Nightingales is.
Well, what it isn't is a concert. It's not a kind of ecology walk. It's a bit of a safari. It's a kind of English safari, but it's a ceremony, and I wouldn't really use this so publicly, but I suspect you, Ali, and your audience would understand where one is in a place of ritual communion that is co-collaborated and co-created And it culminates after a night, a sort of evening out in the woods, eating and discovering the kind of lay of the land and the law of the forest that we're in down in Sussex and also in Bedfordshire. It becomes it's a storytelling experience around the fire, first of all, telling the story of a bird that has become really one of the great kind of archetypal and iconic species that has been largely forgotten, and that's the nightingale, a very innocuous little brown bird that through their song and their very ethereal and charismatic behaviors of singing at night to find love, and also a very potent sense of awareness that these birds have, and acceptance to human proximity and human music, have become across the Northern Hemisphere symbols of fecundity and of amority, of poetry, of creativity, of spirituality, of communion with God. And after dark, I lead the audience of each night. We do about 40 shows in the spring between April and end of May, about 40 people every night, lead them in the dark, no torches, no sound, single file, this snake, literally governed by our hearing and our feet and the little amount that we can see to find the birds. And when we find them, me and myself and a guest musician, every night guest musician will come and sit down in companionship with this nightingale in very close proximity, make music, and the bird will sing with us in this very idiosyncratic way. And it becomes a sort of way of connecting with both the wild, but also the wildness in us, that bit of us that has lost the confidence or knowing of how to maybe be free of all those things that hold us back from walking in the night, from looking at the stars, from being deeper listeners to ourselves and to the song of the land. And it's a kind of proof that when we sing with the land does sing back with us.
It's
yeah.
It's an absolutely extraordinary experience. I did it in early May, I think it was, maybe late April, and just beautiful. And also there is something, and I think you mentioned some poets and people talking about this, there is something almost psychoactive about the Nightingale's song, right? I had my eyes closed, and maybe because it's so idiosyncratic, I mean, people should go and check this out if you're in the UK, or you can make it. I'll put a link to the show in the show notes, but also even just go and listen to a nightingale singing on YouTube or whatever. I don't know what it is exactly, but I was almost having kind of close eye visuals and just very deeply present.
They are psychoactive. They're intoxicating. Depending on what your propensity is towards which substances and what sort of things, people have all sorts of reactions. And I've had indigenous shamans and tribal leaders come, all of whom, particularly from the Amazon and Central and Mexico as well, Mexican Wiradic leaders come and just be like blown away that how much this song feels like it's opening portals. And it does. No drugs are needed. You sit with this bird and you float off into space, and all sorts of things happen. And for an audience who are not psychonauts, stress that you get some pretty normal, average Bob and Jills come along, and they come out just like, what the just been through, I never experienced anything like it in their life. They wouldn't know what ayahuasca was if you mentioned it to them. It's a bit of a Trojan horse of a trip.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, really amazing. And just, I definitely, as I'm sure most people do, fell in love with the Nightingale and its spirit, and, really, and the guest musicians also incredible. So there's actually, as we move towards close, there's actually something you mentioned before we went out before the sun had even set. As you mentioned, we kind of got the lay of the land, walked around, and you talked about coppicing and the effect that's had on the landscape. You also mentioned a friend of yours, perhaps, or an ecologist, who was talking about the way that our ancestors used to map the landscape and know what was going on in the world by listening to changes in bird song, and knew that some foxes were about. This guy who's telling you this. Yeah, maybe you could get into that a little bit, because it leads very nicely into this idea of being attuned with nature as a way of knowing.
Absolutely. And this is a skill I wish I had, that level of perception for people who've really trained or have grown up within indigenous communities where that these skills are necessary. There's a practice is a form of receiving knowledge, mapping, sonic mapping of the land through. There are many ways of doing this, but this one is particularly through birdsong. The birds work on a collaborative, interspecies collaborative form of communication to alert each other for threats and opportunities. And when a disturbance happens somewhere within the vicinity, birds will send out ripples of warning or information. So if that's an aerial predator, they'll send out a particular form of high-pitched alert to let others know. Blackbird will let wren know, will let song thrush, will let nightingale, and it's passed across species as far as needs to be. And it's not just about something happening bad, someone bad coming along, with the axe or with the fang. It's also about abundance. An aphid blossom has hatched that day. A fruit is just coming into the ripeness that's needed for a flock of starlings. So that information is sent out in ways that we can perceive and over long distances through the chains of birds sharing. So the one that I really love was the man who spotted, and this is John Young, I should say, a wonderful North American wilderness guide, really one of my great heroes. And sitting there, knew that a female fox with cubs was walking towards the camp, and everyone went still and into kind of sit spots pose so no disturbance could be made. And about 20 minutes later, a female fox with cubs comes through the camp, and it's purely because the birds have just gone, fox, cubs, female, over there, coming about 200 yards away, and that's it. And it feels so surprising for us, but actually we've depended on this. We've absolutely needed to know and information of much more complexity and detail, because our ancestors were all absolute masters of this, because our ancestors are the ones that got enough food in each year to survive. So we were the good trackers, we were the good listeners behind us. So it's in there, and you spend enough time listening and observing patterns of behavior and building up those threads of connection with the animal kingdom. And before long, you realize that you're just knowing all these things because it's just knowledge that feels obvious because you've put the time in to see those patterns of behavior.
Yeah, it's just absolutely extraordinary. Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, the reason I wanted to bring it up towards the end is it's exactly the kind of thing that gets me excited, because I think what we need to do is find those innate capacities that we have and then adapt them for the reality we're in right now, right? That with this strange, bizarre crux point in history. And that's really what New Ways of Knowing is about, right? The course that we're running, it's getting lots of different ways of knowing and then going on a kind of inquiry altogether into asking, like, how do we apply this practically, meaningfully right now to, and what I'm particularly interested in is, how do we vision a new future? And so that will involve going back into what's inside us and applying it in new ways. And we will be exploring a lot of these topics with you. And I'm really looking forward to that. That'll be very special and a joy. I don't think we'll fully learn how to map out birdsong, but at least we will lean in that direction. But yeah, is there anything, Sam, you wanted to mention or pick up on, or before we kind of close up?
Yeah, just a little taste of why this is relevant. Who the fuck needs to know that there's a female fox coming with cubs? I don't. I'm not going to eat the fox. The fox ain't going to eat me. It's nice to see a fox. I see quite a lot of foxes around where I live these days. So it's less about kind of like reenactment skills. I want to dress up like a Viking and pretend to be a Viking because it just makes me feel good. Is so much more important than that. And I think that's the sort of like, not to dismiss the reenactment world or any of these sorts of things. They're all about, for me, this, I will just share, and maybe this is something we can go into next time, is that as a musician and as a creative and somebody who composes and works with people and creates spaces of connection, the skills that I've learned through my nature connection and through nature observation and through the stories. Most importantly, not even just the first-hand experiences, but hearing the stories of other people's connection and the art of telling the story and seeing, particularly in indigenous situations, how trackers and hunters will communicate and inhabit the story of that animal and their behavior and their situation and their when on the hunt, for instance, that actually those are the skills that have created the best storytellers. And in my sense, with music, my compositional skills have come from being able to understand the causality and the impact of frequency of sound and actually how I want, it's the same thing. That bird somewhere deep in the forest wants to let everyone know something's going on. I'm no different. I'm in a fucking crowded forest here with a load of other bloody noisy songbirds, and I want to let everyone know that I know something that's really important. How do I make sure that transmission gets as far as possible? So that these are all it's not a perfect analogy, but ultimately as creatives and as people trying to find our true expressions, and not just because we are all, we're all creative in our own ways, but in our day-to-day lives, there's an ingenuity and a resourcefulness and a set of refinement to motor skills and sensual, auditory, perceptive skills that are really fucking good place to practice because they translate into the urban and to the boardroom and into the, to the AI sphere that ultimately we have to be the wielders of these. So that for me is why this stuff is important.
Yeah, that was brilliantly said. Yeah, and got me excited, actually. So nice, Sam. Thank you. And I'll see you in a few weeks on the course. Thanks so much for this. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thanks so much, Ali.